It's my honor and my pleasure to be able to share some things with you. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to this particular spot at this point in time. It really is rather miraculous when I unfold and unpack it all for you. And so why don't I start with telling you just a little bit about what I will do today. I will wear 3 hats. The first hat is the hat of a family physician. I've been a family doctor for over 40 years before I retired about 3 years ago. The second hat will be the hat of a patient. I have, in a way, had the blessings of being able to be a doctor and then be a patient and get to see how we treated people while they were patients. That in and of itself is a miraculous observation. And then finally, a messenger. So I'll be switching back and forth between those 3 hats, speaking with you and sharing with you this morning. At St. Louis University, where I worked for 17 years, and also I've been in private practice, but at those 17 years at St. Louis U, I worked as what's called an associate dean. So I taught students, I taught doctors how to be doctors, and I also saw patients. And the reason that's important is because I get a chance to interact with the young doctors while they're in training. And you'll see in a very short while why that interaction is significant. But the other thing you do is you try to learn how to put things together. And I'm going to use what I call the rule of 3s. I'm going to do everything in 3s as best as I possibly can. So the first step is I've told you about my 3 hats: physician, messenger, patient. And then we're going to talk about 3 different sections or segments on our ascent, remembering that the theme of the year is ascent. And this month, February, is the month of relationships, okay? So we're going to talk about 3 different kinds of relationships. First, that intimate relationship that we approach called marriage, and how we can do this successfully. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk about the relationship between you and your church and your faith. And then last of all, we're going to talk about relationship between you, us, and our mind. Okay? So the next set of 3s, and if the team would put up those scriptures to make sure that Spirit Church can see those scriptures. There's 3 scriptures that we're going to use like a track to try to keep us alongside the Word of God. And those 3 scriptures, I'm just going to list them for you. I suggest strongly that you go back and read them on your own. But the first one is Jeremiah 29:11. And Jeremiah 29:11 has to do with God saying to the Israelites, "For I know the plans that I have for you, plans for good and not evil." And the exegesis or the explanation of how this came about, I think is worth taking a little bit of time to go over. It actually was a message from the prophet Jeremiah, and it had to do with the fact that there were a group of individuals that were going into captivity, exile in Babylon. And God wanted them to know that just because I am allowing, in fact, I've actually arranged for you to be captive, I don't want you to despair. I'm going to come back and get you in 70 years. And when I come back and get you, we'll fix things. And so Jeremiah's job was to inform them that God has a plan. And this will become evident to you in the course of our discussion this morning. And the second scripture that I want you to look at is one that many of us have already heard. It's so simple, but I have found that a lot of times the simple things are the hardest things to do. Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not into thy own understanding, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. Boy, it's so easy to say, isn't it? Most of us that have been in church for a while, we just kind of let that roll off our tongues just as easy as saying hello in the morning. But this is not easy to do, as you'll see in a very short time. And then the third scripture I want to refer to is the one where it's my biggest challenge, and probably yours too, which has to do with 2 Corinthians 10:5. And that has to do with that phrase, taking captivity captive. What it actually says is any thought that comes to you that is not of God and is not in the direction of God's teachings, we have to make it captive. And I'm going to have to show you some transparency to make that clearer to you later. And you'll get a chance to be transparent too on that one. Okay, so now we've done our threes. We talked about 3 scriptures. We talked about 3 parts, all on ascent, and we talked about the 3-pronged approach of me as messenger, physician, and patient. And so now I'd like to kind of tell you how it is that I ended up standing in front of you. And it really is quite a story. I got a call from Barb Bryan and Older and Wiser, a group that I work with, and they said, we're going to work with RISE, the young people's group, and we want you older and hopefully wiser people to each one take a few minutes and talk with the RISE group about something that affected your life that you think is important for them to know. So I knew right away what I would talk about. It would be relationships. I unfortunately had been married very early. 22 was when I made the decision to get married. And the marriage did not last. Thank God my second marriage to my wife, Mary, is now in its 31st year, and we ain't going nowhere. We ain't going nowhere. But that first time, I didn't have it together. I thought I had it together, but I did not have it together. So I'm 22 years of age, and I came to RISE, and I said, I want to talk about relationships. And little did I know, this group was so sharp. They are to be commended. They asked questions of me like I have never been asked before. Whenever I talk, I always tell the group, you can ask me anything. There's nothing that you can't say. Anything you want, anything personal, no matter what. This group did it. They asked me. And they came at me, well, what went wrong with your marriage? Were you saved? What did you all do wrong? And then the ultimate excellent question was, well, what can we do? After you told us all these things that went wrong, what are we supposed to do to have a good marriage and a good relationship? So this is what came out. It started with me informing them of how at 22, I did not know, even taking anatomy as a physician, that there's an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And this area of the brain is the area that is, in general, responsible for critical decision making. Being able to take data from the environment and make a good, solid, critical decision. At 22, I didn't have it, and probably you didn't either. I didn't have it, and most of us don't get to that point until we get around 28 to 30 years of age, where you can take information from the environment, information about yourself, the people you meet, process it, and then make a good, solid decision. That happens to us as we get older and wiser. So I didn't know that. I also didn't know that there was a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. Nucleus accumbens. And it's the pleasure center. It releases a chemical called dopamine. And when you do something that is pleasurable to you, that chemical comes out into your system, you feel good, and whatever you did, guess what? You want to do it again. You want to do it again. So this is how cocaine, substance abuse, early sexuality, all these things are associated with the pleasure or reward system. And at 22, obviously, I didn't know anything about it. All I know was I saw what I liked, and I liked what I saw. Let's do this thing. And I went after her, and she went after me, and that was our first mistake. We were not best friends. before we became too close. And then after that, in answer to the questions that wise Rise group gave to me, they asked me, were you saved? And I said to them, we thought we were. We thought we were. But I found out later in life, we were at that time what you call a carnal Christian. A Christian who invites God into their home, into their house, but wait outside when I go in the bedroom. I said, I'd be transparent. Wait outside, Jesus, and when I come back, we can talk. Fix yourself something to eat. Sit on the couch, look at TV, whatever, but this is private. That's a carnal Christian. We are not letting the Lord infiltrate every aspect of our life. So we were like that. We thought we were fine. Did we go to premarital counseling? No. Did we even start going to church on a regular basis? No. So what the Rise group helped me construct with their help was a blueprint for failure. All you got to do is take that picture and flip it, and you can see what you should do. You need to be friends before you get too close. You need to spend time with one another through seasons. And I'm not talking about winter, summer, spring, and fall. I mean good times and bad times. Because sometimes you don't know who a person is until you've seen them in good times and bad times, right? You got to see them in both ways. Then you know who they are. And so the other thing we did wrong was we could have fixed it. Maybe we could have got into church once we got married. But I was too busy going to medical school. I made up the excuse that I'm busy on Sundays. I can read the Bible or look at TV, and I'm okay. I wasn't. Because what I was doing was building upon that negative start, and eventually everything unraveled. So I would add to the positive list of what to do. In addition to that, use your mother and your father and your family and your close individuals. If your mom and your dad, as long as they're reasonable, loving people, say to you, I don't like Johnny, or I don't like Ellie, you better think twice. Because they are not invested in trying to destroy you. They're invested in trying to see you get built up. So we have to listen. My brothers and sisters told me, they said, Michael, what are you doing getting married at 22? You don't even know who you are. And I did the usual thing. Oh, you don't understand my love. You don't understand our love. You know, you just don't get it. But they got it. I didn't get it. So those are the things that we talked about that created a positive thing for them to use in answer to what shall we do. And so this is the first part of what I wanted to talk about, relationships. Now, I got to add this in for those of us that are already married or already connected. It was about a week or so ago where Pastor mentioned fearfully and wonderfully made. That we are fearfully and wonderfully. This will help you finally really understand it. It helped me. When you talk about the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and when you talk about the nucleus accumbens, this is something that is so delicate it works both ways. So what happens in a marriage when people stop touching each other? When people get mad at each other and start sleeping in different rooms? When people start not being kind and loving and intimate with one another? It becomes more difficult to forgive because you become like roommates. And that's what you don't want in your marriage. So I want to help us remember that the nucleus accumbens was really put there for those of us who had the guts and the courage to get married. And when you get married, press that button. Press the nucleus accumbens. Use it often. It's good for you. God put it there for a reason. And that's why I say we're fearfully and wonderfully made, because this is such a delicate area that it can be abused or it can be used positively. And we've got to understand our bodies, which is part of what Pastor Aeneas and Pastor Tracy wanted you to have. When we sit down and talked about what had happened with the RISE group, Pastor said, this needs to get to the church. They need to hear this because it will help all of us. And I think it will help all of us, whether you want to get married or whether you are already married. We have to take all of that into consideration because, as that scripture said, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Everything we do, we have to take it before God. Everything. And we have to keep it before God. So part 2 of our relationship is the church and us. This one is really remarkable to me. I've been an athlete most of my life. From the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I was running track and field and cross country, swimming, playing tennis. Always loved sports. When I was in training for my residency down in Florida, I used to put on. I trained with this guy named. He was a major in the Army, and we would put on parachute boots, and we would run 6 miles in the morning before I even went to work. I tore my knees up. So I eventually got cobalt on the left and steel on the right, but both of my knees have been replaced. But I remained active, and I tried to watch what I eat and take good care of myself. But over the years, later in life, I found myself sitting at the base of the arch, waiting on my oldest daughter to go up in the arch with her husband. And suddenly a gray discoloration came in front of my right eye while I was sitting on the bench right at the base of the arch doing absolutely nothing. I did not know I was detaching my retina. My retina in the back of my eye, which is the structure that enables you to see, was coming apart. And I found out later it was something I had been born with. The shape of my eye was unusual, and it was just a matter of time before this came apart. So within 48 hours, I was in surgery, laser surgery, to try to tack that back down. But in spite of that, I developed glaucoma, and I began to lose my vision. So to this moment, I cannot read print. Seems foolish for me to bring my notes out because I can't read them. But I like to have the comfort of having them here. But I can't read print. And I can't drive anymore. Now, in addition to that, I became deaf. And in addition to that, I was bicycling up Art Hill about a year or so ago, and I realized that I was breathing a little harder than I like to breathe. I said, well, you better go to the doctor. So I went to a cardiologist, and they surprised Mary and I and said, you got 5-vessel coronary artery disease. 5 major vessels around your heart. We got to cut your chest open and redo all 5. And so we did. So the vision, the deafness, the knees, the surgery. Here's the remarkable thing. At no point in time did I ever feel depressed. At no point in time. I knew as a man of faith that God had a bend in the road, but it was not over. There was going to be some different things, and maybe even more exciting things. But I had to have the courage to go through it. And so I messed Mary up because Mary was at home getting the house ready, trying to get a bed to bring me home from the hospital out of the ICU. And I'm steady talking to the doctor saying, I'm ready to go. After one day, I was ready to go. I didn't feel any pain. I didn't have any pain. I took pain medicines one day. I got home, and I was ready to roll. Get into physical therapy. I was walking within a week. I was back on my bicycle within a couple of weeks, and I was bicycling multiple miles before a month was over. And the cardiologist says, Doc, we can't send you to cardiac rehab. We have no place for you. You're already ahead of cardiac rehab. So I said, well, what shall I do? And he said, just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. And that is what happened with Mary's help and especially with God's help and God's confidence that God put into me. But here's the part that I really want you to get. At no point in time did the orthopedic doctors, the hearing doctors, the eye doctors, the heart doctors, nobody asked me about my faith. Not one time. Nobody prayed with me. And I went on a crusade to study the literature as best I could to determine what happens to people who have faith when bad times hit. What happens to the mental health of people who have faith when tragedy and unexpected things hit? And so I started researching this. And the next part is me unfolding to you what I discovered. You know, we always say God is great and God is awesome. But when I was in medical school as an associate dean, I was asked to give what's known as the white coat ceremony speech. This is when people first come to medical school and they want to be physicians. And when we bestow the white coat on them, we have a speech. And I remember saying to those medical students, don't make the mistake that I made. I was not getting close to God. I was not spiritual. I was not religious. I made a mistake, and as a result, it compounded errors in my life by not doing that. Don't you make that mistake. You come to medical school for far more than just learning about anatomy and science. You should be flexing your spiritual muscles. You should be trying to figure out who is your God and how can I serve them. There was a young lady in the audience who was born in China. And she heard me talk and she said, I'm going to meet him. And so she came to my office during the first or second year of School of Medicine, and I became her mentor, and she became my mentee. She decided she wanted to become a psychiatrist. And she did something that I've had no other student do. She became triple boarded. Pediatrician, child psychiatrist, and an adult psychiatrist. All three. And we stayed together by phone. She's been by my house. She's met Mary. We still connect. It's been 10 years. She ended up becoming a professor at Georgetown University. And so she went to the people at Georgetown and said, you need to hear Dr. Railey talk about spirituality. And they said, yeah, let him come. So it was her, born in China, coming to the USA at the age of 7, that opened the door for me to go to Georgetown University and talk to them about spirituality, faith, and mental health. And what I discovered in my studies was 444 studies on depression. And the large majority of those studies showed less depression in people who attended church on a regular basis. Then that we looked at suicide. There was a large component. 75% of the studies looked at 144 studies. Less suicide in people who went to church on a regular basis. Then we looked at PTSD, alcoholism, substance abuse, all the same. Anxiety, a little less so for anxiety, but still diminished in people that went to church. And they discovered there's a difference between religiosity and spirituality. People like to say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. We can't measure that as scientists because you could be worshiping rocks. You could be worshiping flowers. We can check religiosity because it may be that you're in church every Sunday. It may be that you go to Sunday school. It may be you are in special groups like RISE or Older and Wiser or whatever group it is that you're in. And what we are discovering is that the participation in the church process does something to people. It does something good to people. And when you look at mental health and overall well-being, it's off the chart. People are taught to believe that they should be and have gratitude for what they have. Don't focus on what you don't have. You focus on what you do have. And that gratitude feeds into something we call resilience. People come back from bad things that happen to them easier. So when Pastor T and Pastor Aeneas and I talked about this, he said, I want you to include that. I want them to know that religiosity, for lack of a better term, religion, and actually following a faith and participating on a regular basis does something positive for your mental health. And so my message to Georgetown University was, doctors should be talking to their patients about their faith. Doctors and churches should come together, because now science is recognizing that something special about having a belief system, and it does something special to you. And so the studies came from Harvard, Columbia, Baylor, Duke, top medical schools in the nation are leading the way in saying that science and spirituality and religiosity should start working together. Yes. That there is something to it. And that's exciting to me. So I want to go to the last part. If you put up, team, the brain pictures, we're going to look at some brains. I think there's 2 slides that I have there. The first one talks about a lady named Lisa Miller, Dr. Lisa Miller. And what we can do is when we get that up, just put up those 2 color pictures of the brains. And while they are finding that, I'll just kind of describe, oh, you got it. Okay, good. Beautiful pictures. Now, let me tell you what this is about. And this is now moving from the church and faith and our relationship there to our relationship with our mind, with our brain, with our thoughts. Dr. Miller, Lisa Miller from Columbia University, was one of the top medical schools in the country. She decided to get a group of people who had a family history of depression. And she wanted to take pictures of their brains. So they did MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging of their brains. And what she saw, it's on the left, I believe it was, that the brain pictures had more red, so they need to see this while I'm talking about it so they can see that there's one set of brain pictures that has much more red. You can see it's on your left, I believe. And then the second set of brain pictures doesn't have as much red in it. This is 103 people whose family histories, either mother and father or grandparents, had depression. And we know that there's a tendency to be depressed when there's family history of depression. Doesn't mean you're going to be depressed. It just means there's a tendency there. So what Dr. Miller and her team discovered was that the brains on the right without so much red had thicker cortices in that frontal part of the brain than the ones on the left where you see the red. So the red area represents thinner portions. And what was it that separated these 2 groups? How important is religion and spirituality and church to you? The people who had the thicker area said, it's important to me. The people who had the thinner areas said, it's not that big a deal to me. And that tells us something, right? Now, scientifically, that is not proof of what we say causality, but it is what we call a correlation, which demands more study. Now we are wondering, what happens when you pray? Something happens when you pray. Something happens when you go to God. And we believe that there's something that happens you can actually see in your brain that happens when you go to God on a regular basis. This is really exciting to me and should be exciting to you because it's something that we can see. Our big difficulty is that as creatures of this planet, we tend to only want to believe what we can see and feel. And it's kind of nice to have something that will help us be able to grasp. But keep in mind, even if this doesn't show it, it doesn't mean you shouldn't believe it, right? Even if the brain doesn't get thicker, it doesn't mean that you would push your faith to the side. One of my favorite movies is a movie called Secondhand Lions. Got Bob Duvall. And in Secondhand Lions, Bob Duvall makes a statement about talking to young men and telling them that you got to have something that you believe that's right, whether you can prove it or not. So I like science, but even if science doesn't prove it, I know what I'm going to believe. And you should know what you're going to believe, and you got to stick with it. The last thing, I've tried to be transparent with you, and now here's your chance to be transparent, parent. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand or anything like that, but you can think about it. This is what happened to me. I'm a football fan. I used to be a bigger football fan when the Rams were in town, but I suffered through that like the rest of you. So I walked into the bedroom, and I had the TV set on, and it was on the Total Access channel. And there was a woman on the screen. Her name, they call her MJ. Some of you all may know about MJ. Her name is Marjorie Acosta Ruiz. And she's one of the television analysts for Total Access NFL. She's drop dead gorgeous. She's a Dominican American. So I walked into the room, and I saw MJ on TV for the first time, and I said, wow, here's my challenge, and here is your challenge. The third scripture. Any thought that is not in line with the teachings of God, with God, we need to make it captive. And right there where I'm standing in front of the TV with my no-seeing self, because I had to get real close, I heard a voice say to me, take that thought into captivity. I want to know what you're going to do with it. What you going to do with it, Mike? And I said, And then I said, okay, what kind of questions is she asking? And she asked Commissioner Goodell of the NFL, what about this lawsuit? What about it? Do you really think we have a problem with racism? Let's hear your thoughts. And I started focusing on the questions she was asking instead of how she looked. When you take a thought captive, you redirect it. You put it the way it ought to be, looking at that woman for her talent and not for how she looks. Right? That's redirecting a thought. And that's what each one of us got to do. So you've got to look in your heart and say, what are those thoughts? Is it that second piece of warm peach cobbler with a cold glass of milk that you know you don't need because you already had one big wedge? Are you being greedy? Is it a glass of whiskey, a bourbon? Is it some reefer? Is it some alcohol? Is it another man, another woman? What is it? You have got to take your thoughts captive, one at a time. Take them into captivity, redirect them, and practice it. And then we'll be able to see the results, we hope. And we certainly will be able to feel the results. So as we close, let's look at the three areas that we talked about again. We talked about relationship and intimacy in marriage. And we talked about how important it is to subject everything to God, knowing that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And if we get things out of place, they're going to be out of place. So we have to do that. Number two, we talked about our relationship to our church. And this is a point that is my editorial. It shows how important you are. I made the comment about how nice everybody has been allowing me to speak this morning and treating me so kindly. They helped reduce my nervousness. They were just wonderful. And But you know what, church? Somebody did a study on churching and discovered that when you make 3 new friends, you want to stay at the church. So, Spirit Church, you're very powerful. When you reach out to somebody you don't know, and when you're nice to somebody you don't know, and when you're friendly to someone and open yourself up to them more than once, every time you see them, you are working on helping them develop that 3 that will make them say, I want to stay there, so that they can get the benefits of less depression, less suicide tendencies, right? Better well-being, all these things. So you have great power just by being nice to the people that you see. And when we don't do that, people get discouraged, and sometimes they say, I'm just going to go somewhere else. That's right. We don't want them to say that. So keep doing what you're doing. It's so important. And so as we close, I would just once again thank you for the opportunity of sharing these items with you. Hopefully they've been very useful to you. I know they've been very life-changing for me. And what I would say is that just as the Lord took that little baby born in China and connected us at St. Louis University, and she goes to Washington, D.C., and allows me to talk. Incidentally, on that Zoom presentation that I made, there were 66 people from the Department of Psychiatry at Georgetown. And they asked me afterwards, what can we do? And I said, you need to ask your patients about what they believe. Yes. You need to help people understand that you must incorporate your faith into the things that happen to you in life.